All right, good evening. Welcome to tonight's meeting of the ARPA Committee. We are here tonight to talk about the qualification matrix that was part of the application package that was presented to us last week. So with that, I'll turn it over to Town Administrator Charlie Seelig to give an overview on some of the conversations that had happened prior to this meeting.
So John and Melanie had talked with me last week about the criteria. We had the original proposal, the one that was brought to you last week, included one, whether or not the application reflected the town's strategic plan. Except the fact is, we don't have a strategic plan. I don't mean that in a bad way, in the sense of that there's no idea of what we want the town to be like, but there's not a written document that we could refer to or an applicant could refer to. And really, that category should be dropped. But we could add in another category that is rated based on whether or not the town is going to have to spend additional funds in coming years because the proposal, besides spending the money that one time, will create operating and maintenance costs. And the idea would be that a grant application that did not require that on an annual basis would be seen as a better application than one that a department would then have to go back and add a material amount of money into their operating budgets in future years. So, no points for something that's going to require a substantial increase in a budget, maybe 1 point for a small increase, 2 points for no change in the sense of it can be contained within the operating budget as it is right now, and 3 points for one that isn't going to require any operating costs in the future. The other area in terms of the discussion was whether or not to offer this application out to town departments. If you remember, last week Plymouth County was here, and they have said that they are not going to approve applications where municipalities are basically passing money through to businesses, to households, individuals, to nonprofits. They see this as a twofold problem. One is just the additional paperwork. They're now dealing with the town government. They're dealing with all these other entities. The second is ensuring that the money is spent properly. Whether it's Plymouth County, whether it's the town, we're going to be subject to audits of how we spend the $4.3 million, making sure that not only were the original applications that were filed and approved ones that qualified under the ARPA regulations and federal law, but that once the money was allocated, it was spent according to what the application said it was for and not for other purposes. It didn't go into somebody's pockets, for instance, or was spent on something that wasn't described in the grant application. Melanie and John had asked, should we be doing the same thing? Should we be eliminating non-town departments, so the businesses, the nonprofits, families, individuals, from the application process for the same reasons? Additional paperwork and then having to track the money that much more to ensure that it was properly spent. The flip side of that is one of the main purposes of the ARPA program is in fact specifically to help the businesses, the nonprofits, households, and individuals who were hurt by the pandemic. It's one of the categories specifically laid out in the federal law. Simply giving the ability to apply does not mean you are required to, in fact, approve a grant. Then the grant approvals would be done through the Board of Selectmen. But obviously they would come to you, you would be making recommendations, but the Board of Selectmen would make the approvals. But it does ensure that everybody else outside of these buildings has an opportunity to come up with ideas and put in applications as to how to spend the $4.3 million that East Bridgewater is eligible for. I think town departments take into account that what they're trying to do is in fact help all those individuals, everybody who lives here, everybody who works here, but in relation to their own departments. Whereas I think there'll be a different perspective for nonprofits, for businesses, et cetera, who are looking to get back on their feet. I don't see the money necessarily as simply filling a gap. What I want to see is people and businesses and nonprofits being able to thrive again because we would be giving them an influx of money. Obviously, they'd have to make the application and show, in fact, how that's going to happen. What I'm looking therefore for tonight is recommendations to the Board of Selectmen on both of those issues. One, the change in the categories for rating proposals. The second is whether or not the applications should be open to non-town departments. You'd be making those recommendations. The Selectmen are meeting tonight at 7:30. They can make the final decisions on those.
Well, just, from my perspective, that's not how I processed and understood what the county commissioners told us. It seems, I won't say entirely different, but I got more of an impression from the treasurer, Mr. O'Brien, that they were looking to use this money not just for town governments, but for private sector organizations, nonprofits, whatever, to not only help people that had lost during the pandemic, but to inject something into the town that would benefit all just from the injection. I don't know if anybody else heard the same thing I did.
So I think like Charlie said that is part of the spirit of the program, but Plymouth County, when they were here, did state that they won't accept applications where we would subaward the money outside of the town government. So if we wanted to subaward it to a business in town or a nonprofit in town, that we couldn't use Plymouth County's portion of the money, they would not approve that application.
The Plymouth County portion.
Right.
Yeah.
So are we distinguishing between the Plymouth
Yes.
County portion
Yes.
for their meeting tonight versus our portion?
So,
So what we would need to do for the Board of Selectmen is to recommend that we either do or do not open up our portion, the NEU money, to applications from subawardees, basically.
To,
Organizations outside
Okay.
of town departments.
so there's 2.8 million sitting with Plymouth County. They would say,
right,
no,
right.
we're not
That
gonna
was
accept
broken
this.
down nicely. I appreciate that, too. That was,
And the 1.5 that would be with us
Right.
would be used for that.
and
If
like
we're-
7.8, 784, and 7.8.2.
Exactly.
So I, for one, think that we should consider the outside businesses and, entities of not just the, town organizations.
So Melanie, you're gonna be we're just the committee making
Right.
a recommendation. You're gonna be the one having to live with this for 4 years.
Right.
So what type of administrative burden does that put on your department to do that tracking, or do you even know at this point?
I don't know for sure at this point, but it would be to make sure that, so there's compliance that with the program that is used for the eligible uses, and it would be following through that money with whatever business or nonprofit and making sure that they were using it for those purposes. And then doing the reporting piece, it's quarterly, I believe, to the federal government on what we've spent the money on and what the other nonprofits or businesses have spent the money on. And I guess my fear in that is just that record keeping can be difficult. And if you're talking about a small business or you're talking about a nonprofit, depending on what their resources are, you don't know when they're applying what their record keeping capability is or things like that. But I definitely understand that the idea to help the businesses and the nonprofits in the community is,
But all those
Yeah.
concerns, couldn't those be taken up at the application, during the application
yes,
process?
yep. And too, that, and I think Charlie brought this, when we spoke with Charlie, he did ease my mind a bit, that if someone put in an application saying, I run this business in town, I lost out on about $50,000 of revenue, it's made it hard to pay for X, Y, and Z, I need to replace that money. If we were using this criteria, something like that's not gonna score very high on our criteria because it doesn't have a lasting effect on that business. It might help them that one point in time, but it doesn't sustain, it doesn't help their sustainability, it doesn't, it doesn't rate very high here. So we wouldn't have to be approving every application, obviously, that came through. And then I just worry, I just don't want, if a bunch of businesses apply and we say, oh, well, none of you guys really fit our criteria, then I also worry what that opens us up to.
Charlie, if a business applies and is awarded ARPA funds through our process, and then they subsequently are not complying with the reporting that Melanie needs to get to the state, where does that leave the town?
I don't know. I don't know enough.
Something too that I could talk to, we have new auditors as of this year, so I haven't started a back and forth with them yet, but this might be something that we could talk to
And
them
part of
about.
it may be that we see them spend the money and then the reimbursement process occurs. In the sense of just, Plymouth County will allow both ways, not for the money we're talking about, but we can apply to them for funding before we spend it. And if they say yes, then they send us a check. We can also, just as we did with the ambulance, apply for money after we've spent it. We've actually bought the ambulance, we paid for it. What we can do with the businesses and such is say, we need to see that you actually have spent the money on the way you said you were gonna spend the money, and if you show sufficient backup to prove that, then here's your check.
That's my thinking too. It's like you're not giving someone the money and saying, tell me what you did with it. You're saying, what did you do with it? And then here's your check to reimburse you, correct?
You can work it that way, yes. That provides an added degree of protection for the town.
It just doesn't make sense not to have a plan in place.
Right, I agree with you. Leaves us way too open if we don't do
Yeah.
it that way.
Yeah.
I think that's a good way to manage it, and I think it helps us stay in line with the intent of the funding with the community. And, who knows, we might get 3 applications, we might get 50 applications, you might get no applications. But it's just my thoughts. And you're right, if it's after the fact and they can prove they spent it, that's a safeguard for you.
The only problem I can see with that, though, is with a small business or a small organization that doesn't have the funds to invest, that they can pay out and then wait for the
Right.
return.
Well, then they can still make that case, and we'll have, I think, work with our auditors and try and work out a system that still protects the town.
I don't envy you trying to enforce it.
One less day at the beach.
I know, right? No, I mean, I think reaching out to Melanson would be a good idea.
Okay. So I guess any other comments or discussion on the matrix, the updated matrix?
I think the updated criteria, it works.
I looked at that as sort of like a flow chart, so, if it doesn't fulfill the criteria, it gets kicked out. If it does, it moves to the next one,
Right.
correct?
Exactly, yeah.
It's a really good rating system for something that comes
Taking into
in.
consideration future costs is very, very,
Very
very
important.
important. You don't want to do something, have somebody come in the next year and say, oh, I need 50,000.
Right.
I think, yeah, the obviously the better of the plans would be if it's a one-time investment and it doesn't affect us, especially after 2026, yeah. If it has no cost after that would be the best. See, I almost fell over like
We need to invest in chairs.
Yeah.
Cheers in that.
The committee wants chairs.
Yeah.
Oh, it could be a multiple department application, lots of people. use
Right.
this for-
Swap them out with all the ones in the corner.
Just waiting to see if John gets here, because we really can't vote, because we only have 3 voting members, and we need John.
Oh, you're not a voting member.
Okay. So there's that. So I guess the change on the rating schedule, I think we're all in agreement with, on the maintenance
no problem
costs
with
being
that.
included.
So, yeah.
Is it fair to say we're okay with applications being open to outside organizations if, with the high consideration, if they spend the money up front and we serve as a reimbursement, we would still entertain applications if they didn't do that, but there's a bigger burden of proof on the organization's end to the town then, and there's risk for the town,
Yeah.
which Charlie and Melanie will investigate with the auditors.
Yeah, I think that, just my opinion is that I think we'd make a huge mistake if we didn't open it to small businesses and nonprofits and organizations.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to, like, you know, almost like eliminate people that can't pay upfront.
Right.
But I think it would behoove us for people that can. But yeah, honestly, I don't really want to hold that against them if they can't,
Right.
you know, so.
And it's so dependent on what you get for applications and what
Exactly, yeah.
projects people have in mind, so.
But the other thing too, maybe could we distinguish, talking about paying up front, distinguish between private sector and nonprofits? Because nonprofits tend to have less in the way of reserves.
I think that you can take that into consideration when you're reviewing the applications, yes.
So I think that makes a lot of sense. Yep. Okay.
What would be our methods of, besides obviously at a Board of Selectmen's meeting, but getting the information out to the public?
Well, I'll find a way of dealing with Facebook, for instance. We have the PR firm that can get it out to the media outlets and everything like that. You know, have it, obviously on the website.
Right.
Is there any consideration at the Board of Selectmen level for a Town of East Bridgewater Facebook page?
I think some of the members are considering it.
Yeah.
Do other towns run Facebook pages?
Yeah. I think it's helpful.
Geez, don't we have enough Facebook pages in town?
We
At
do.
least you know you
I just
just
think
want to
sometimes
get
This will
accurate
not- yeah,
information.
I think anything like that from the town hall, let's say, or the board of selectmen, would be a non-commenting, simply, be basically,
Information.
Just
we're
information.
not gonna get into debates with people.
Yeah, and it's better sometimes.
You're
I
not
think
gonna-
you sometimes get, if you push information versus trying to get people to seek it out, I think you get a bigger response.
Yeah, it's, I mean, it definitely reach a lot of people, and if you, like you said, non-commenting, that is a good way to get information out. Like we talked today about like having the cooling center and things like that. It's a perfect place to put that.
Yeah.
Yeah, we need one this week, right?
I think the COA,
Yeah,
is
the
that
COA is
official?
open during their
Normal
normal hours at
business
this point.
hours.
If I had known that, I would have been there today.
They have air conditioning, they have a big room, you could,
Depending on how the weekend goes, Tim and
Work
the search
from
team may
there,
open
or-
up town
Wi-Fi?
hall during the weekend.
good question. Does the COA have Wi-Fi?
Pardon?
Was the COA have Wi-Fi? I would think so,
Yeah,
right?
they definitely have
So,
Wi-Fi.
yeah, people working from home if you don't have air conditioning.
Yeah, they do, because I was their finance committee budget liaison, and they
Okay.
pay for their own. Yes.
I should know, I can't.
Supposed to be close to
We pay so
100
many
this
bills.
weekend.
Yeah.
And I would say they're probably open.
All
I
right.
had a question on part two of the application now. I'm assuming that if we're going to do what we talked about, this application will be for private enterprise, small businesses.
There's gonna be one for the department, simply because we know them already.
Right, no, that's understandable.
And then there'll be the separate application for the non-town entities, yeah.
So the one that we have a copy of, I just had a couple of questions on page, part two, number 4 and 5. It seemed like something was cut off.
I'd have to look.
These here. I mean, I just try to make it clear when people get it.
Yes, I see what you're talking about.
You know, I mean,
Yeah, I-
it's pretty
I-
straightforward,
Yes,
all
I'll
4
go
pages,
back,
so.
I will go back into the cell and find out why, I mean, probably the text is there, it's just hidden.
It's almost like if it was XL,
Yes.
something was in the
Right,
next,
yes.
over the block, yeah.
So regardless of the form and the application process, people will still be subject to various questions about their projects and have to bring different information, because no two projects are gonna be the same. So that's not just the be-all and end-all. There's gonna be a lot of questions, I'm sure. And a lot of different things that you may need to validate the expenses, et cetera, or that they may incur, so.
My apologies to each one of you, and keep going or
We're actually, I think you were saying we're
Came at
waiting.
the right time because we
killing time
couldn't
waiting for
vote
you.
until you got here. So just to recap for you, Charlie reviewed everything with us on the change to the matrix to include the future maintenance costs.
The column that you had mentioned got removed, and then the future costs got added in.
And then we talked about the benefits and the drawbacks to offering to town organizations or entities within town. The consensus of the committee was that we should open it up to organizations within town, with the preference being that they spend the money first and we reimburse. So that way it eases Melanie's burden of tracking. But if an organization couldn't do that, we'd still entertain it. And Melanie was gonna check with the auditors to see if we did disperse funds and they weren't adhering to the reporting requirements, what does that hold us accountable for?
Right, that's a good counsel, yeah.
So what I asked you all was that your recommendations back to the board of selectmen, because their meeting is 7:30, for the change in the criteria, but also to say yes to the non-town departments applying. So that I go back to the board and they would take the official votes later tonight.
Okay, and to be clear, officially, it's their decision, not
Yes.
ours.
But I'm looking for recommendations from you all.
Right, well, that is the purpose for the board, of this committee, I mean, is to provide recommendations to the board, and they act on them as they see fit. So, is there a motion?
I make a motion that we adopt the ARPA criteria matrix as presented with the inclusion of the future project costs, and that we allow applications from organizations within town, outside of town departments, as per the discussion this evening.
Second?
Second by Ken. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
Passes 4-0.
I think that's it, right?
Okay, yeah, that's all I have. I know that.
Make a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
We're adjourned.
Thank you.